Danny Rolling, born Daniel Harold Rolling, was a serial killer who was known as the Gainesville Ripper, who committed a series of murders in Gainesville, Florida. He was sentenced to death for the 5 Gainesville murders in 1994. He was executed by lethal injection in 2006. Danny Rolling committed the series of murders in Gainesville, Florida in the month of August 1990. 8 months prior, he killed 3 others in his hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana. Louisiana police alerted Florida authorities to an unsolved triple murder in Shreveport on November 4, 1989. The police didn't initially tell the news media the similarities between both cases, but the posing and mutilation from both crime scenes were oddly similar. On the day of his execution, Danny Rolling finally confessed to the murders of 55-year-old William Thomas Grissom, his 24-year-old daughter Julie Grissom, and his 8-year-old grandson Sean. Even though Rolling confessed to the Shreveport murders, the DNA did not link him to the crime as of the year 1991. When Danny Rolling committed the murders in Gainesville, he was an unemployed drifter who was a severe alcoholic and abused drugs such as marijuana and LSD. He had also committed previous crimes, as he was arrested for voyeurism and went to prison for 8 years for robbery. Danny Rolling was divorced at the time of the Gainesville murders, and his father, who was a police officer, was physically abusive towards him growing up, beating him twice a week and tying him and his brother together outside the home. There was no evidence he was sexually abused.
Danny Rolling sits there as the person who killed, in murder in the first degree, Sonia, Christine, Krista, Manuel, and Tracy. On that day, he pled guilty not only to the murder in the first degree, but he admitted that he entered each of the buildings where they resided. First in the apartment of Sonia and Christine, then in the apartment of Krista, then in the apartment of Manuel and Tracy, while he was armed. He was armed with a knife just like this. He was armed with a 9mm automatic weapon. That was armed burglary. That issue is now foreclosed. He admitted on that occasion that before he murdered Christine Powell in the first degree, he raped her. Before he murdered Krista Hoyt in the first degree, he raped her. And before he murdered Tracy Paulus in the first degree, he raped her. Over the next several days, the state will follow up on what must have seemed to you an exhaustive and an intrusive and maybe at times even an embarrassing procedure of jury selection. You've now been selected. You are the ones that are going to make a recommendation to His Honor about what penalty should be imposed for those crimes that he has admitted to. Over the same next several days, the state of Florida will present evidence to you to prove how each of these crimes occurred. Now, you note that I said how. Remember why. Who is behind this? It's him.
Danny Rolling's method of killing was stabbing his victims. Rolling used a bar knife to stab his victims and also used duct tape to gag and to bind his victims' wrists together. His female victims were all brunette. Manuel Taboada, the male victim in the Gainesville, Florida murders, was killed because he was an obstacle to his primary target. He mutilated his victims and posed them afterwards for shock or for sexually provocative purposes, and sometimes used mirrors for the posing. He raped some of his female victims. Danny Rolling was a heterosexual male and had worked in the retail and food service, and had also served in the Air Force and was dismissed without seeing combat duty because of drug and alcohol abuse and antisocial tendencies. Danny Rolling was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and paraphilia. When asked what his motive was as to why he murdered, he said he wanted to be a superstar like Ted Bundy. On Sunday, November 13, 2022, in Moscow, Idaho, 4 students were stabbed to death in their homes in the early hours of the morning with a car knife. 3 of the victims were female. Many people online remembered the Gainesville Ripper case and noticed the similarities of both crimes.
Back in 1990, a different college campus was terrorized by a killer on the loose. 5 University of Florida students were murdered. It happened over the course of 3 days. And there are a few similarities between that case and the University of Idaho quadruple murders. News Nation's Sloan Glass is back with a chilling look at the man behind those Florida killings.
Yeah, chilling indeed, Nicole. Danny Rolling, dubbed the Gainesville Ripper, was behind the murders of 5 college students in Florida and a family of 3 in Louisiana. Rolling's killing spree was so gruesome, he was the inspiration behind the movie franchise Scream.
The University of Florida, killing 5 students over the course of 3 days. He targeted women who looked like his ex-wife. The murders and rapes were brutal, especially for those covering the case, like TV anchor Doris Keller.
And we had some of our police contacts who were telling us more about the scenes than they were living on, early on. I think a lot of it came out in the trial, but yes, it was very sickening. And to know how they, positioned some of the bodies and that type of thing, how Rolling did that, it was just unreal.
The victims were female, except for in one case, when Rolling didn't know a male roommate was home, ultimately killing him too.
It was just very fearful, very stressful. The students who remained in town, especially the female students who lived near those sites, the murder scenes, they were very fearful. They were anxious, and many of them, ended up going into therapy and that type of thing because of how traumatic this whole thing was.
In the end, the serial killer wasn't caught in connection to the murders. He was arrested for a robbery. It was 4 months later, when he was in jail, that DNA evidence linked Rolling to the Gainesville murders. He confessed and was put to death in 2005. Hours before his execution, he confessed to killing 3 members of a family back in his hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana. The sheer sadistic nature of Rolling's killings is different from the Idaho College murders. In one case, Rolling beheading one of his victims. But there are a few similarities in the 2 cases. Both college campus crimes were committed with a fixed-blade knife. Rolling broke in through sliding glass doors, and the house where the Idaho murders happened did have a similar door that could have been the killer's point of entry. And in both cases, the universities and surrounding towns were crippled with fear. The Idaho case remains unsolved 2.5 weeks later, many students not returning to the campus out of fear. In Gainesville, students slept in large groups, taking shifts to sleep. Always someone staying awake on watch. College kids armed with baseball bats walked to classes.
I had people that actually walked through the house and made sure there was nothing amiss, that no doors that had been ajar or anything like that. So yeah, it was a tough time especially for those of us who lived there. But again, it was a close-knit community, and we all came together and all helped each other out.
The University of Florida shut down for a week, and when it reopened, many students never returned to campus. To this day, there is a memorial and mural on campus honoring the 5 students.
Serial killer profilers say Rolling grew up in an extremely abusive home. Rolling carried that abusive behavior into his failed marriage and other parts of his life. Of course, there's no evidence at this point that it is a serial killer who is behind the University of Idaho murders.
Danny Rolling was connected to the Gainesville, Florida murders case from DNA they had taken from robbery crimes in the past he had committed, and his DNA was close enough of a match to make a DNA link. He was apprehended less than a month after he had killed 5 individuals in August 1990. Brian Koberger was also apprehended shortly after the 4 students were murdered in Moscow, Idaho, in a similar crime to the crimes Danny Rolling committed on the early morning hours of Friday, the 30th of December 2022 at his parents' house in Pennsylvania. Danny Rolling is said to be disorganized because of his antisocial personality disorder and a lust killer because of his connection with murder and sexual gratification.